Dr. Grant. My dear Dr. Sattler. Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roca. I'm a voiceover artist, pundit, writer, producer, host on Collider Video, and a number of other things, including the Top 10 show. And I can't believe that we are going to talk about this movie finally that has been at times a source of contention between me and, at least this franchise has been a source of contention between me and our guest for quite some time. We have a running gag about it all the time on Movie Talk. So I am quite looking forward to this episode.
Well, you've hinted that we have a guest. Do you want to say who that guest might be?
Absolutely. Our guest for this episode is someone who I revere very much as a movie critic, as an analyst, as a pundit. She is a box office queen that a lot of people know her for. She has a very strong following, has her own channel. She doesn't do enough work at Collider that she has to have her own channel to review films and talk about stuff. You know her as the proud mom of Dewey the cat, and a massive fan of Diet Cokes as well, and a massive fan of this franchise, the lovely, very talented, and incredibly intelligent Perry Nemiroff.
That was mighty kind, Roca. I feel like I need to clip this out and play that at the beginning of every single one of my videos now.
You did before we started ask for a good introduction.
I did. I've got very high standards when it comes to Roca.
She does. Trust me, she does.
Welcome to the Cine-Files. We've been talking about having you on for a long time, and I think since the beginning, we've been talking about this film, which is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park.
This is my favorite movie of all time.
This is number one.
This is number one of all time, hands down, no contest.
Do you remember how you first came to it?
I do. I vividly remember my first time watching Jurassic Park. I guess I was like 6 or 7 at the time.
Sure.
I think I was 6. And I went to the theater with my parents, my little sister, who would have been closer to maybe 4, and 2 older cousins. And we sit down, and it was magic on the screen from the second it started. And what I vividly remember is the second the T-Rex breaks out of its paddock, all of a sudden my little sister gets up and she leaves. And then my dad gets up and he follows her. And the rest of the movie I kept watching, but I kept turning around. And they don't really have this anymore, but you remember when they had those little like rectangular windows in the back that you could kind of see through and see the screen?
Sure.
He was holding her up and she was looking through the window at the screen the rest of the time. But yeah, after that day, that was kind of it for me. That was the first time I really processed movie magic too, and just the idea of being transported into something that, is kind of surreal, and I was addicted to that feeling.
What a great introduction to that. I mean particularly because, you talk about movie magic, who better to talk about than Steven Spielberg? I mean, he is the master magician. John, do you remember how you first came to it?
Yeah, I was considerably older than Perry. I think I was 24 when I saw this thing in the summer, I think, of 95, right?
93.
93. Oh, sorry. So then maybe I was 22. I'm sure it was on some kind of break from the military that I'd come home to see it with probably my family. This was like right at the tail end where we would go as a group to go see movies. This is right at that tail end where all we're getting at an age where you don't go as a whole family anymore. And I think this is one of those last ones where we went to see together. And I remember enjoying the film very much and having a great time. And it's right when Spielberg is at his at the top of his game and doing the things that he's doing and had been building for quite some time. And you enter into the 90s. And I just remember enjoying this film very much. And the special effects are the things that I was really blown away by, how believable the dinosaurs were. And of course, I was starting to get into independent films. So I knew who Sam Neill was. I knew who Laura Dern was from Rambling Rose and other stuff that she had done. I think there were other ones, like she did that film with Treat Williams, that was the Bob Dylan song that she had. So there was other things that I'd seen them in. And then you throw in Samuel L. Jackson, who was just starting to, and then
Just
of course,
the beginning for him.
right? And Wayne Knight, who I think was like just starting to do Seinfeld, or maybe it was before Seinfeld. I think it's right around that
I
time.
think Seinfeld has started.
Yeah, it started.
No,
So-
Seinfeld's definitely.
So I've
going
seen
on,
it, yeah. So all of that, and then of course Sir Richard Attenborough, who is one of my favorite actors
And favorite directors,
and
too.
directors as well. Because he did Gandhi, and he was in The Great Escape. So all of these were just like, it was great to see. And of course, once again, here's Spielberg using a director like he did Truffaut in Close Encounters.
Oh, what a great point! I hadn't thought about that.
So it's just that kind of thing. He has like reverence. So everything about it was a great action adventure movie, perfect summer movie. So I remember that.
Yeah, so for me, I was working in Berkeley at the time. It's that time where I'm trying to break in as a comic book writer. And I remember going to see it at the UA Theater on Shattuck Avenue with all of my friends and just being totally, totally blown away by it. I just, because I'm a huge Spielberg fan for me, it starts probably with Raiders, but Raiders and E.T. and Close Encounters and all those movies. And at that point, this movie was so groundbreaking and so thrilling, and it went into that VHS rotation of something that I rented, and then I owned it on VHS. I might have owned it on Laserdisc. I know I owned it on DVD. I watched it a lot, but then I don't think I had watched it in a long time until I watched it again about a year ago, and then watched it again a couple of times in the last week. And, it's really funny. I always loved the movie.
Yeah.
But I don't think I gave this film enough credit. I thought this is Spielberg at his best sort of popcorn movie, and I just didn't study the craftsmanship as much as I have now. I think this is just an amazing movie.
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about how this whole thing started. The first thing that I found out is that the very first toy that Steven Spielberg remembers from his childhood is a dinosaur.
Oh.
And I was thinking about, we had done Close Encounters with Scott Manson. There's the story that he tells in Close Encounters where his dad wakes him up in the middle of the night and takes him out to look at the stars.
Right.
And that has this profound effect on him and this sense of wonder about, could there be something out there? And that sense of wonder leads to Close Encounters. And now I think about that first little dinosaur toy. And obviously that was special to him. And it's funny, dinosaurs are special to a lot of kids. Were they special? Were you big dinosaur fans as kids?
Shockingly, no. And because this is my favorite movie of all time, everybody always asks me that. Are you into the science? Do you know all the dinosaur stuff? And I was never into it as a kid except through Jurassic Park. I think any interest I ever had was specifically through this movie, but even after the movie, it's not like I went out and got books
the
or
sciencey
anything.
stuff.
All I basically did was take this VHS tape and play it over and over and over again. And also I had to have every single Jurassic Park toy you could possibly imagine.
Nice. Yeah, I was obsessed with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but if you asked 4 to 7 or 8-year-old Steve, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said a paleontologist.
You knew how to say that at 7 or 8 years old?
I did. And I had a book that was called All About Dinosaurs, which I read over and over and over again. And I went and took little kid dinosaur classes at College of Marin. As a little kid, I was obsessed with dinosaurs.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was obsessed as well. Read them like as a kid growing up, but way before Jurassic Park, obviously, like growing up reading about I was fascinated. Brontosauruses, Triceratops, all the different kinds. But I didn't know how many there were that I didn't know that are in this movie. And like even the raptors, the idea of the raptors, I'd never thought to see the raptors. But I was always obsessed with T-Rexes. T-Rexes were massive for me. That and Brontosauruses. Those were my two favorite dinosaurs always. And so living in Virginia/Washington, D.C., going down to the Natural History Museum to see, I could do that any weekend I wanted to go. And as I got older and was able to drive, I would occasionally go down, spend a whole day walking the Smithsonian museums with a couple of friends and seeing all the historical stuff that was fun. And dinosaurs was always like the number one spot just to see what was new.
I think, and I mean, kids that aren't like, you don't see that huge skeleton and they don't go, wow.
Yeah.
You can't imagine what's going on with that kid. Yeah. So Spielberg, obviously he knows Crichton and they're talking about some other projects. And then he kind of goes, hey, what are you working on now? And Crichton says, oh, I'm working on this dinosaur book. And I think Spielberg right then goes, dinosaur book? What do you mean? And Crichton doesn't like to talk about his work until it comes out. And Spielberg forced him like, no, tell me what this is. He tells him what the story is. Spielberg gets an advanced copy of the book, and then he does something which he's never done before, which is he starts storyboarding from the novel. Wow. I never heard of anyone doing this. He was so excited about it. He starts storyboarding from the novel. And of course, the big question is, how is he going to pull off the dinosaurs? That's the real problem. Right. How are we going to do it? And they put a lot of time and thought into it because he wanted these to be the best creatures that had ever been seen. And the key to it is real natural movement. He wanted the animals to move smoothly. He wanted them to breathe. He wanted realistic skin textures. He wanted them to have the right effects on the real world in terms of weight and power. And that's really, really hard to do. And what's interesting is they ended up not doing it at all the way they planned to do it. And I'm going to hold off on talking about that until we can see some dinosaurs.
Well, it makes sense, Steve, to be worried about that too, because we had grown up with like the Ray Harryhausen stuff, and like King Kong, and like the original 1933, where you see how that ape, and that it still holds up. How King Kong kind of, even though it's fast, it's still ferocious to look at, and well done. And his battles in the movie, and the Harryhausen stuff, 1 million world BC or 1 million BC, those kinds of movies.
Clash of the Titans and
Clash
Seven
of right.
Voyages
So
of Sinbad.
There were dinosaurs or large creatures in those movies, and that's what we were used to. But Steven wanted something more real that you could feel tangibly was authentic.
Well, and remember, one of his most famous films had this animal in it that barely worked.
Yeah, fair point.
And so he, knew what it was going to be like if this wasn't going to go the way he wanted.
Right.
And the truth is, I think there is tremendous connections between this movie and Jaws.
Oh.
I think there are all these lessons that he learned from Jaws that we see applied from a master filmmaker in this film.
I think it's this, Jaws, and E.T. Because it's all about that reach out and touch it kind of feeling. And
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
E.T., it was about the interaction between the human characters and this alien creature. And that's a big reason why Jurassic Park holds up so many years later. And we don't have that anymore. It's like we're constantly arguing about the newer Jurassic films.
Right.
And, I understand why. And even though I love it and love that franchise, and really it doesn't matter what kind of movie you give me, if you put me back in that world, I am going to like it to a degree just because I have so much history with this franchise. But as good as some of those digital effects look, I think it's almost lost that reach out and touch it feeling that you got from that original movie. I think Lost World has it a little bit, but the newer ones, not quite as much.
Well, because I think E.T. is a great thing to bring up because there is an emotional component of wonder and joy and awe that Spielberg is the master of, and that those other films, they don't have that. Casting is really important in this film. He wanted Richard Attenborough from the beginning.
Yeah.
He just, saw this character as this man. And one of the things that's interesting is he saw a connection between the John Hammond character and Bridge on the River Kwai.
Which is one we're going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. We definitely have to. And because of the Alec Guinness's character being obsessed with something and taking it much too far, and also this thing of you really liking the Alec Guinness character at the beginning and still kind of going, wait, what exactly is happening? Yeah. And for the rest of the cast, he went to Janet Hershenson and Jane Jenkins, who are fantastic casting directors. And what Spielberg wanted was he didn't want movie stars. Yeah. And so he goes to people who are coming kind of out of independent films, and that's Sam Neill and Laura Dern, who I adore. I've loved Laura Dern in everything she's ever done. She's just fantastic. And Sam Neill, even just in Hunt for Red October, I love Sam Neill.
Yeah.
So good. But of course, the biggest discovery, I think, is Jeff Goldblum. And what's funny is apparently written into the script, and I can't remember from the book, is that he's more of just a nerdy scientist type. And Jeff Goldblum comes in with something completely different.
Yeah, not a surprise.
It's interesting reading the book after I saw the movie, because that was one character where I could never get Jeff Goldblum out of my mind. I think even though the character reads differently, I was always picturing him, whereas I can see other glaring differences between book and film.
Oh, yeah. There are huge ones. Yeah, that's a really good point. Once you got Jeff Goldblum, he's stuck in.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the beginning of Goldblum having this kind of reputation for creating these kind of outlandishly crazy characters that he still does. If you watch Thor, as recently as Thor Ragnarok,
right,
he's still doing
what
these
year's
very
The Fly?
Interesting. 1986.
So The Fly's before this.
Yeah, Fly's great.
Yeah,
God damn,
He's great in it.
Yep.
He's really good.
There are a few release dates I know, and there are that's one of them because I love that movie so much.
I haven't seen it in forever.
Really?
It's been a really long time. It's
so
probably
good.
20 years since I've seen it.
I wore out the VHS copy, then I copied it off the television and wore out that one. I love that movie so much.
Both of them are so good. That one and the original one.
Oh yeah, right. The Vincent Price,
Which is strangely enough directed by James Clavell. I think one of the weirdest, the writer of Shogun
What?
and King Rat and Noble House directed The Fly. He also is the screenwriter for The Great Escape.
Oh, wow.
Which is another movie I love and would love to do.
Which Attenborough's in.
Which Attenborough's in.
Yeah.
So originally they were going to shoot in Costa Rica, but there really wasn't the infrastructure they needed, so they decided to shoot on Kauai, and they start building it. And of course, they have to build an entire amusement park, which is a huge, huge production design problem. Rick Carter is the PD. He studied Disneyland, studied Disney World, really to figure out how it works. And just as they've gotten everything built, they've started shooting. In comes Hurricane Iniki, and it is a big, powerful storm. It comes straight out. Apparently, the center of the storm was right at the hotel. The eye of the hurricane went over the hotel. And during this hurricane, everyone, the cast, the crew, the staff of the hotel, all the guests are huddled in the main ballroom listening to 185 mile an hour gusts of wind batter the building. It was really loud, really scary, and Richard Attenborough slept through the whole thing.
Of course he did.
Yeah. When you're old, you can sleep through a lot of things. Let me tell you.
And when they woke him up, they said, "Oh my God, how did you sleep through that?" And he said, "I lived through the Blitz."
Yeah. What are you going to say to that?
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, their sets are ruined. They've got to start building that all over. But really, the whole area is really devastated. And so they have this crew, which is, movie crews are incredibly skilled, incredibly resourceful, know how to build things really fast. And the first thing they start working on is helping the community get back on its feet. And the cast pitches in and the production staff pitches in. And what Laura Dern says is this really bonded them as a group. So even though it was a terrible thing to have happen in the movie set, in a lot of ways, maybe it helped the movie.
Well, and they all got paid to do it.
Fair
Extra
point.
for staying on the situation.
That's
right?
a fair point.
And I've been down in Kauai, obviously, to interview The Rock for the Jumanji stuff, and being down there, all the signs are still up there in the places where they shot, and it's always fun to go. And I bet that's a big reason why.
Sure.
Because that community loves and respects what they did.
Oh, yeah.
And the Hawaiian community is a very powerful community. It goes generations deep, bone deep in, and if you help the people, they revere you for that. Because
that's a great
and I
point.
think that's probably why they have all that stuff up there.
I need to get there for a visit.
You got
I
it.
still
You
can't
over there?
believe I haven't seen all that stuff. I was in Hawaii once when I was like too tiny to remember it, but the point is that was also before Jurassic Park. I need to get there to see all the setups they have, because I know if you go on any of those Universal trips now, they take you there.
And you do the ATV trip, which you ride the three-wheel ATV all over the muddy
Nice.
thing. And it rained while we were there, so we were able to go. And they have dinosaur bones out that you can
This
ride
is
up on.
my kind of activity.
You gotta next time they send, you gotta go because it's such a blast to do
awesome.
it. Yeah,
Would you like to get into the movie?
let's do
Oh
it.
yeah.
We start with the Universal logo. We hear the sound not of the Universal theme, but of jungle sounds and birds. And we hear that great John Williams score coming in. And we're in the jungle and we see something moving through the trees. And of course, as an audience, this is the dinosaur movie, so you assume this must be a big dinosaur. But it's not. It's a misdirection, because what comes out of the trees is a forklift. And held in that forklift is carrying a huge metal box. And we have a whole bunch of guys wearing helmets and uniforms, and they got guns. And whatever is being moved in that big box is really, really serious and really, really scary. And there's one guy who seems to be in charge. He's kind of dressed like a hunter, and he is his Muldoon, and he is giving the orders. And they clearly have a system of how they're supposed to put this thing in.
Okay, pushing, team moving.
They move that box towards this cage. You have the first team, which comes in to unlock it. And then after that's happened, the lights switch, and they say, okay, loading team, step away.
Well off, loading team, step away.
And they call in the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper climbs up on top of that thing. He starts to open up the gate. We see the raptor POV through the gate looking up at him.
Joffrey, raise the gate.
The gate comes up. The raptor charges, knocks the whole thing backwards. Gatekeeper falls in, and this moment is really, really scary. His body is halfway in, halfway out. Our hunter has grabbed him, is holding onto him. There's basically a panic among all these guards as he calls to them. They're electrocuting this animal, and the fear and the screaming from the gatekeeper at this moment is absolutely terrifying. And then he gets pulled up in the air, which of course is some guys behind this box lifting him up and down, but he seems to move. You can tell the power of the animal based on the reactions we're seeing from the gatekeeper. And finally, the hunter yells out, "Shoot him!" Which is just a fantastic moment, but it doesn't work. And slowly, the gatekeeper slips through our hunter's arms and disappears into the cage.
such a crushing opening.
Really
I
is.
feel like the second this movie started, my poor parents probably looked at each other and said, "Why did we bring
How
our
old were you
teeny
again?
I think considering it came out in the summer of '93, I must have been 6, not yet 7.
Yeah.
But I was instantly sold thanks to this opening here, and it's crushing. It's so crushing when you look at the actor who plays Joffrey's face the entire time. You could feel the pain that he's going through because you haven't even seen the raptor. You don't see any blood, anything like that. It all needs to read on his face, and it does. And the decision, too, to have his hand slip out of Muldoon's arm at the end in slow motion and then fade to the next scene, I feel like that decision also makes it even more upsetting.
Well, and this to me is this connection between this movie and Jaws, because this to me is Chrissy going swimming.
Yeah.
Is that you have this really, really scary moment right at the beginning of the film with characters you don't really know, with an unseen, and that's really the key to me, is an unseen monster. Is that with Chrissy, it's just the dark, and it's her reactions and her screams that make it so scary, and then she gets just pulled in and disappears, and that's exactly what happens to our gatekeeper.
Well, and also, like, if Muldoon is basically Quint to a degree,
Oh yeah, sure.
that shot of the hand going through is very reminiscent of Scheider being unable to hold on to Quint as he falls into the shark's mouth in that
That's a great
sequence
point,
at
too.
the end. So that there's the same director shooting, kind of having some homages maybe to, because the opening is absolutely the same opening as Jaws in a different format.
Well, I think it's really important because
setting.
although this is going to be a movie about some dinosaur action and being scared of the scary dinosaurs, we're not going to get to those for a really, really long time. Yeah. And so we need to kind of tell the audience, don't worry, the exciting stuff is coming, hang on. And that's what we do right at the beginning, is this incredibly thrilling, incredibly scary moment. And then we cut to a guy in a suit riding up on a raft, going up to this mine, which is an amber mine, and he is looking for someone named John Hammond, and he is concerned about insurance and about safety, and there's got to be an inspection, and Hammond doesn't want the inspection, and we go into the mine, and what's so brilliant about this that Spielberg does is we're getting a huge exposition dump right now, and that's usually pretty boring in film, so what does he do? He puts us in a great setting with great camera work as we go, what exactly is happening in this mine? And what we see is they're pulling out amber. And slowly but surely the camera moves in, and we see that inside the amber is a mosquito. And we also hear for the first time, about someone named Dr. Grant. Yeah. And Dr. Grant is the person who's going to have to inspect this park, whatever it is. And the guy in the mine says,
"Because Grant's like me. He's a digger."
Shout out to that actor, Miguel Sandoval.
It's such a great setup, too. And it immediately shows you who Gennaro is, too.
Yeah.
Because, if you actually look up the translation of what they're saying, they're all picking on him the entire time.
really?
They're betting he's going to fall off the raft. And it's also, they don't even give you the translation of this either, but as he's talking about what's in the amber, he basically says something like this is going to make a lot of people happy. And if you don't go out of your way to look that up, you're not going to know, but you know it based on his tone of voice, his expression, how excited they all are to find this piece.
I mean, unless you speak Spanish, then you get it.
I Googled it.
if only we knew.
I was curious.
You should.
And speaking of digging, let's head off to the dig.
Yeah.
We see hands and brushes cleaning off this partially buried velociraptor skeleton as the students and Grant and Laura Dern are all trying to do this. Skeletons don't come that way in the ground. That's not how you find them.
Nice, neat, and organized.
It is a lot more difficult. And this is where we meet Sam Neill and Laura Dern. And they're just fantastic in this movie. And what we get very quickly is Sam Neill's a bit curmudgeonly. He doesn't like computers. They're doing some cool thing where they're shooting something into the ground and using sonar, which apparently discovers another perfectly assembled velociraptor skeleton. As soon as Sam Neill puts his arm on the computer fritzes out. Yeah. And this, of course, is a running joke. And then he starts talking about the fact that we've seen this evidence that velociraptors are like birds, that dinosaurs and birds are related. And this little kid thinks it looks like a giant turkey.
A turkey, huh?
Oh, no.
What Sam Neill does to him, what Dr. Grant does to this kid, is so horrible and so funny. I mean, he just comes at him.
And that's when the attack comes, not from the front, but from the side. From The other two raptors, you didn't even know were there. And he slashes at you with this. 6-inch retractable claw, like a razor, on the middle toe. He doesn't bother to bite your jugular like a lion, say. No, no. He slashes at you here, or here. Or maybe across the belly, spilling your intestines. The point is, you are alive when they start to eat you.
That's one of those things that will scar a child for life. And I think that might be one of my favorite speeches in the entire movie, one of my favorite pieces of dialogue. And when you just look, it's the same thing as the Joffrey thing, where you only mainly think about the ensemble and all the famous faces, but then you have all these supporting performances that are so key to selling certain moments. And here, that kid, as he's saying that speech, and you cut to that kid, and you could just see all that like snotty, bratty confidence just stripped away as he starts to picture what happens when a raptor spills his intestines.
And eats him while he's still alive. Well, and the other thing that's happening, and again, this is good lessons for filmmakers out there. We're getting some exposition in a really entertaining scene. We're hearing that raptors, unlike T-Rexes, don't just see movement. We hear that they attack in groups, that they come at you from the side, that they're intelligent. You know, all these things that are going to be really important later in the film. We're getting in this really entertaining moment,
Which makes the kid like freeze.
the kid totally.
So don't
out.
ever forget that. It's
and he walks away with Laura Dern, who's like, you know, if you wanted to scare him, you could have just pulled a gun. and Grant's reaction is,
You want to have one of those?
and she's like, well, not that one, but I do want one. And Grant's just like, well, kids smell.
They do not.
Some of them smell. Babies smell.
They smell, they're noisy, and they're expensive.
Actually, all true. Those are all accurate statements about kids.
It's also a great window into this like subtle thing that this is a relationship. We don't know. It's not overt. It's not presented, and it's great in that way. And you know, she clearly wants to have children with him. He does not want to have kids. So this has been a conversational. There's just a familiarity about the way they address this topic that you know they've talked about it before.
Their relationship is actually only said out loud, addressed out loud one time in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And it's when Malcolm asks Grant, are you two, you know, and he doesn't really say like a resounding, like, yes, we are together. He just goes, yeah, and like kind of brushes him off.
Grant is a fascinating, curmudgeonly sort of character. Right. He's very much inside himself. He clearly is passionate about what he's passionate about. He's uncomfortable with a lot of things in normal world, like computers and children and human relationships. And yet he does clearly have a deep relationship to the Laura Dern character, but it's subtle.
And I also think there's no way they're in a relationship if she doesn't also do what he does.
Right.
There's no way they have a relationship.
Yep. That is a great point.
Yeah, he is his own person and only is interested in this. If you're interested too, then I will love you by proxy.
And just as they're sort of talking about kids and stuff, a helicopter comes up, which makes all hell break loose because now there's dust and dirt going over. Well, we have to cover this very, very delicate dig. There's a bit of a panic to get this taken care of. Grant runs to the helicopter, says, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down, and then turns to the trailer, heads over to the trailer, and inside the trailer already is John Hammond, Richard Attenborough, turning around and popping a bottle of champagne.
What the hell do you think you're doing in here? Hey, we were saving that.
For today, I guarantee it.
How exactly did he get into the trailer and out of the helicopter without anybody seeing him?
He can move really fast with that amber cane.
Yeah, I guess so.
He's part raptor.
His character, I think the casting of Richard Attenborough is so brilliant because he's so likable in one sense, and this guy is such a entitled person, self-obsessed kind of person. Yeah. Just opening up someone's bottle of champagne, I have kind of a problem with. Like, you should really ask before you go into someone's stuff.
Not when you have something to celebrate like that, and not when you're the person funding their dig.
Yeah. That is a fine point.
And you can replace the bottle of champagne.
That's true, with probably a much nicer one.
Probably.
And of course, both Grant and Ellie, which is Laura Dern's character, are both kind of mad at him until they realize who this guy is. Yeah. And he just rolls right into his spiel.
I own an island off the coast of Costa Rica. I've leased it from the government, and I've spent the last 5 years setting up a kind of biological preserve. Really spectacular, spared no expense.
He is one of those people who who's very passionate and is clearly used to other people getting swept up in his passion. And right now his passion is about this park, and he just needs them to come for a few days down to his island off of Costa Rica to sign off on the thing. And if they do, he will fund their dig for 3 more years.
Yeah.
He will do anything to make his dream come true. Spare no expense, whatever it takes to make that park. And to be able to, it's not even just about him saying, oh, I finished the park, I created this park. He is so truly passionate about bringing that park and that spectacle to kids and their
Absolutely.
families. That is genuinely what he wants at his core, but he's a little... he kind of overlooks all the other things happening around him, for better or worse, in order to make that happen.
Which, when you dream a really big thing, that's not unusual. There are a lot of people, whether it's Walt Disney or Steve Jobs or, Orson Welles, who bruised a lot of people getting to the dream that they wanted to create. And I love, by the way, the reaction of Laura Dern and Sam Neill when they hear that they're going to be funded, and they're sort of taking that in and okay, and then giggling and then hugging and then toasting with the champagne. It's a great, great emotional moment. We're off to Costa Rica where we see Newman. I really can't see him and not think Newman.
Hello, Newman.
Hello, Newman. And it's Wayne Knight who plays Dennis Nedry, and he's at a restaurant, and he's waiting for someone named Dodson, and this guy shows up with a briefcase, and he yells out, "Hey, Dodson!" And the guy's a little nervous. "Hey, keep it down, keep it down, keep it down."
You shouldn't use my name.
Dodson! Dodson! We've got Dodson here! See, nobody cares.
And what's happening is some industrial espionage. He's handing him a briefcase with $750,000. That's a lot of money.
Those embryos are worth quite a bit.
Yeah. And they're talking about how, and he asked, well, how am I going to transport them? And out comes this Barbasol shaving can.
Barbasol.
It's the greatest idea ever. And it's so iconic now, too, where, if you showed any movie fan out there a can of Barbasol, their mind would immediately go back to Jurassic Park. That's why they make replica cans. That's why I have a little Barbasol can pin that has a magnetic thing that flips up and it shows the dino DNA inside of it. It's such a smart move.
Yep, like the Reese's Pieces.
And we see that,
E.T.
We not only do we see how it opens up and has this little compartments, but we also see it has real shaving cream.
Yeah. And then someone's going to eat that on a piece of pie.
So nasty.
Poor person.
And I love that Wayne Knight is just giddy, laughing through this maniacally in this really through the whole thing until we get to the fact that you have only 36 hours to transport it. And suddenly he gets deadly serious and he's like, that's all on your guy in the boat.
Yeah.
I've timed it out. I need 18 minutes to get out. And when I do, if that boat's got to be there and if it's not, we're in trouble.
It's the second you take something out of his hands. He has that whole control room under his own lock and key. He knows he can get that down to the second. The second it comes to somebody else doing something, he's in trouble.
Well, and he is a horrible person.
Yes, he is.
In almost every way. He is a mean, nasty, arrogant,
gross. His workspace is unacceptable. I would lose it if I were in the room with that.
So we're on a helicopter, and now we get to meet Jeff Goldblum, Dr. Ian Malcolm.
So you two dig up dinosaurs?
He kills it in this movie. He is so funny and so charming and so odd and so arrogant. Yeah, I love this character.
His mannerisms and his laughs are just
awesome.
Yeah.
They're only Goldblum. They're so Jeff Goldblum specific. I had the chance to interview him for Independence Day Resurgence.
Hey-o.
And before we even started talking about the movie, at one point we were just casually talking, and he did one of those laughs like, rah, rah, rah. And I took it and I clipped it together with his laugh in this scene. And I could just watch that on loop.
That's hilarious. And I love Hammond's line about him is that
You'll have to get used to Dr. Malcolm. He suffers from a deplorable excess of personality.
Well, and it's a fun window into him as an actor. Like just the touching of Richard Attenborough's knee. Like Who knows how much of that he cleared before he did? Because it looked like he didn't. Because Attenborough's like, what did I tell you about this and touching and do the things you're doing? And he's like, doing all the things that he's doing. And everyone seems this close to cracking up when he's doing what he's doing because they're probably just watching this guy do something that they instinctually don't know how to do. And in this quite interestingly charming yet slightly offensive, but not really offensive because it's Goldblum doing it kind of way, he walks that line so eloquently. And then to have what's his face? Attenborough's character say to the lawyer, like, you brought the rock star, I brought the scientists, you brought the rock star. And even Trevor's like, what are you talking about? I didn't hire this guy. So it's interesting how this whole relationship goes.
Well, we're going to see all sorts of interesting dynamics between Malcolm, Alan Grant, and Ellie. You know, because he's immediately kind of flirting with Ellie. Yeah, with his chaos theory, smooth
bullshit.
Dr. Sadler, I'd be surprised if you weren't familiar with the idea of attraction or something like that.
So smarmy and so funny.
Does he bring up the flapping of the wings in this one? The beautiful, or is that later on? The butterfly wings and
I think that's later.
That's
later.
On.
Okay,
it's later.
That's later on.
And we hear that we're coming in on the island and we're going to get a little bit bumpy and everyone's putting on their seatbelts and Sam Neill goes to put on his and he has 2 females.
It's such a smart story element too because it's clearly mirroring the fact that all the dinos in the park should be female.
Shit. Yes, that's great. I hadn't thought about that. And of course, what his final solution is, because he's an old school guy, just tie the seatbelts together.
You do what you got to do.
You got to do what you got to do. We land, beautiful shot as it comes down with the music in front of the helicopter. We get out. Hammond takes Ellie and Alan arm in arm, and we head off on the Jeeps. And of course, first thing we do is we go through this huge gate. It says 10,000 volts, which is, again, perfect Spielberg storytelling. And the insurance guy's doing what his job is, which is we got to check out what's the security here. And Hammond just tells him, you should relax.
Let's get something straight, John. This is not a weekend excursion. This is a serious investigation of the stability of the island. Your investors, whom I represent, are deeply concerned. 48 hours from now, if they're not convinced, I'm not convinced. I shut you down, John.
In 48 hours, I'll be accepting your apologies.
So here's the thing about filmmaking, which is that a lot of times the movie that happens, the story itself is unexpected. So you have characters that are going to go into a situation expecting one thing, and then they're going to meet the monster, the bad guy, whatever. So you're going to go to the Christmas party at your wife, who you're having marital problems with, building in Los Angeles, and you don't know that terrorists are going to come take over the building. And so, but the thing about it is that in really great movies, you need to be involved in the story that they think is going to happen before the other thing is happening. And in Die Hard, we're totally involved in John McClane and his wife and her boss and the guy, the coke-doing guy who's kind of an asshole. And we're really interested in that. And if that movie continued, it would actually still be an interesting film. This is the best example I can think of, which is setting up all these things about insurance and security and signing off and toys and evolution and flirting and the conflicts about science and all this stuff is fascinating, and we're going to stick with it for a really long time.
That's the genius idea about, Michael Crichton's book too. He's creating a theme park that we would all genuinely want to attend, and we get the luxury at the beginning of Jurassic Park, the movie, to be able to see and get the impression that we could reach out and touch all these things that we would want to see should this park exist in the real world, and then clearly it doesn't pan out that way.
Well, and speaking of which, that's where we're about to go, because we are about to have our first sight of a real dinosaur. I think this scene is remarkable. I think this is one of the best scenes in any movie I can think of. And every time I see it, it makes me cry. It is so moving to me. Really? We're driving in, and first thing that's happening is Ellie's kind of distracted by a leaf that shouldn't be there.
It shouldn't be here.
And then you see Alan Grant stand up in the Jeep. We hear the rise of the music, and he reaches up to take his glasses off and kind of stumbles with it a little bit. And you see his face, and then you see him reach down and turn Laura Dern's head, and we see her reaction. And then we see it for the first time, the dinosaurs. That is just an amazing film moment.
It's a dinosaur.
It is so well done. And on multiple watches, it's so interesting too because you know what their faces look like. The way you describe it, that moment is just so iconic. Then when you watch it again and you look at other people like Gennaro and even Malcolm, I find Malcolm to be one of the most interesting people to focus on in that moment because he's basically the non-believer. He's the one not rooting for the park most of the way through. But even in that moment when he gets his first sight of a real dinosaur, he can't even help but to smile.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
This is the wonder of it. I mean, this is that thing that Spielberg saw looking up at the stars as a little kid. This is the moment of playing with the dinosaur toy. This is just reaching out and touching E.T. This is this thing that Spielberg does better than anybody else in the world, which is the joy, the wonder, the childlike experience of seeing the magical thing. I mean, it is an amazing filmic moment. And you see Grant and Ellie kind of stumble out of the Jeep and move towards the giant Brachiosaurus, and the camera angle moves low below them, and the dinosaur rears up and comes down, and its feet hit, shaking the world right on the downbeat of the music. It is just perfect filmmaking. And of course, our insurance guys, our lawyers going,
We're going to make a fortune with this place.
I wish I had the beauty that you guys feel. Like I think it's a fun moment, but I don't ever get like emotional.
Oh yeah, no, I get chills every single. That is one of my favorite scenes of all time. I've done the task of trying to rank my favorite scenes in Jurassic Park, and that's actually not my favorite, but it's up there.
It is an amazing scene.
It's a great scene.
And now Alan's starting to ask questions like, how fast are they? And they say, oh well, we tracked the T-Rex at 45 miles an hour. What?
Yeah.
32 miles an hour, I believe.
Oh.
All right. I defer to you.
You have to defer to it. She's seen it 7
You are the
times.
expert.
Well, that's a good Schmodown question.
It was on there. It's either 32 or 36.
Okay.
Well, we clocked the T-Rex to 32 miles an hour.
And then I love too that Grant, he started to hyperventilate.
Yeah.
Because this is his life's work. I mean, can you imagine you spend your whole time from childhood on, you know that he loved dinosaurs as a kid, speculating and thinking about these things. And now here they are. The real things are right in front of you. And as he kind of puts his head down between his knees, Hammond walks forward and the music rises and he says,
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Brilliant. This is a great delivery of the line. Jurassic Park.
Perfect. And they sit down and watch, and we kind of hear, oh, they're moving in herds, which, reinforces, I think, one of his theories. And Hammond kneels down next to him. And you could see his love for this place and his love in their experience of it. This is why he did this.
Yeah.
He wants kids and all sorts of people to have this experience. And Grant asks, how'd you do this? I'll show you.
It struck me as I was watching the movie this time, this whole sequence, we get right into the movie. There's no backstory. There's nothing. It's like nowadays a critic might look at this movie in 2008 and be like, well, I don't know why Grant's here. Like, what is his motive? What is the what is the motivation? Where does he come from? What was the really, like there's all this stuff to explore, but it's done so well, and this is why you cast the way you do, is that you don't need any of the backstory to have you fall in love with these characters and enjoy these characters, because they are what they are, and they're all going for what they're going for, and there's no time. Really, there's no time to have any kind of conversation about like, oh, I remember when I was 10 years old and first time I held a blah, blah, blah. There's none of that. It's all just kind of presented.
It's
because
done from performance and it's how it's set up.
And I think that's incredible.
The whole thing does take place over a pretty short period of time, but it's also just, I mean, in any movie, it's the art of exposition, the art of not having to rely on an exposition dump and having you learn this information supernaturally, not supernaturally, but very naturally, you know what I meant? And that's exactly what they do here. I mean, that's what they do in a scene we just talked about where they're taking the ride over before they see their first dinosaur. Is that conversation between the two of them. It doesn't feel like they're talking to you and saying, this is our problem. This is what we have to do to solve it. You're just part of the creation of the park.
Yep. So I kind of held off earlier. I want to talk about those dinosaurs and how they did them. So originally their plan was to do a combo of Stan Winston, who is one of the great practical effects guys, building puppets, and they were going to do stop motion, just like King Kong, just like all those movies we've talked about. And the person who's in charge of the stop motion is a guy named Phil Tippett. And so Stan Winston starts building all these huge puppets. And technology's come a long way since Jaws. And a lot of them are specially designed to do specific tasks. Yeah. So this one is going to be able to move this foot, and this one is going to be able to do this thing. This one is going to be able to breathe, etc. And they look really cool. And they start looking at some tests of the stop motion. And the problem is all the things that we know, which is the motion is not smooth. They don't breathe. The textures are a problem. And while this is happening, Dennis Murin, who is at ILM, who's someone we've talked about before, says, hey, maybe we can do it with computers. And we've been talking about these guys multiple times on the Cine-Files. We first talked about them because the very first special effect they did is the Genesis project in Wrath of Khan.
Wrath of Khan.
And we just talked about them very recently because they did the T-1000 in Terminator 2. Yeah. And that was in 91. And this is now 92, a year later. And they say, maybe we can do a dinosaur. So they try to do a test. And in the test, they get basically a dinosaur running that's just a skeleton. And Spielberg looks at it and it's moving smoothly. And he goes, let's do the full test. So let's put some skin on that dinosaur. And they do, and they come back, and Spielberg's there, and Phil Tippett, who's the stop motion guy who's been hired to do this thing. And they watch this dinosaur run, and Phil Tippett says, I think I just became extinct. And it's got to be a crazy moment to see the profession that you've been working your whole life on disappear.
Yeah.
Oh, just like in the movie.
Yeah, just like in the movie.
Good point.
And so now they make the decision. Okay, we're not going to do a stop motion combo. We're going to do a combo of puppets and CGI, which has never ever been done before. And here's how I feel Tippett is very smart. Is he says, well, listen, because he's going to be fired. That's what he's thinking. And he goes, listen, we're not going to do it. We understand. But we have, with my staff, decades of experience of bringing animals to life through stop motion. So why don't we work with the CGI people? Because they don't have this experience of making natural movement and all this stuff. And so they become a partnership where that they start, and they even to the point where they design a puppet, which acts as a computer interface so that they can, with each move of the puppet, that goes into the computer and becomes the movement of the CGI creatures. And I just think that's so brilliant. And it also reminded me of a film we talked about a few months ago, which is in The Incredibles, where you had the 2D animation people come from with Brad Bird's team, come and work with the 3D animation people at Pixar, and they learned from each other. And it sounds like that's really what happened, is that they became a teamwork that ended up making these dinosaurs more realistic and more interesting.
It's so
unprecedented, and it's vital to why the movie is still just as good today as it was way back then.
Right, and that scene we just talked about that gives you chills and makes you cry, there's no way that scene works as powerfully without that technology being perfected the way it was to make it seem believable, as almost like you can reach out and touch it. It's that believable.
I honestly think they still really hold up, those effects.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Oh my God, absolutely. I really don't think there's really any flaws. I mean, I'm already seeing certain flaws in Jurassic World that just came out, and I mean that's the risk you run nowadays with only digital effects. Not that the entire movie was only digital. They did have some practical stuff on set, but when you create a creature purely digital, eventually that digital capability is going to become dated, and you're going to start to see the cracks in it. And with this kind of stuff, that reach out and touch it feel, you don't have it the same way. That's why I have great respect for everybody who works on digital effects, because the VFX work that happens is absolutely incredible in some things. I love when you can actually utilize practical effects to this kind of extent.
Yeah.
So we ride up to the visitor center, and you could see that they studied Disney to do all this. And John is on a spiel. This is the most advanced amusement park in the world, and it's just not just rides, and he kind of is talking about biological attractions and capturing the world's imagination. And Grant's been kind of quiet, and they ask, what are you thinking? And he says,
we're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
And now we go into sort of a ride. Our little Disney introduction to the science that made the park. And here's my question. So we see a film John Hammond walk up.
Hello.
Hello.
Say hello. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello, John.
Oh, yes. I've got lines.
Oh my God. Yeah.
What?
Well, just working in a theme park, you see films like that all the freaking time.
Yeah.
So seeing him, and it's really charming though. He's like, oh yes, I've got lines, and he pricks them, and all of that. It's really well done to convey a theme park so effectively, but also some of the most cringe-worthy parts of a theme park as well.
They did it great. Well, here's my question: the filmed John calls out to John.
Yes.
Was John Hammond going to be there
Yes.
for every single ride?
Why did you doubt that? It's John Hammond.
That is so bizarre and impossible. Like
Then you have new people dress up as John Hammond.
Maybe that's what it
probably,
is.
Yeah.
And here we get, again, a very fun way to do our exposition, which is a lot of exposition about dinosaur DNA and about mosquitoes trapped in amber and retrieving the blood and going to the lab. And of course, our main characters, particularly Alan Grant, are going, well, wait, how do they solve this problem? How do they solve that problem? And this whole thing is they get locked in by these bars because it's a ride and they're moving. And Alan wants to get off the thing. Again, not comfortable with technology. And finally, he just forces that safety bar up. And Gennaro's just going, can he do that? You can't do that. Which really, in a ride, you really shouldn't be able to do that. Right. That's not a good plan. And we
You even see the rocks move in the front when they lift the bar. It's like you could tell that it was like probably a foam rock or something.
And we head into the lab. And there we see a robot arm turning some dinosaur eggs. And one of them is moving, and a dinosaur is about to be born. And in comes John Hammond because he insists on being there when they are born. Yeah. This is this thing where you kind of go, I don't feel comfortable. Why don't this guy he's so warm and, fuzzy.
It's coming from such a good place, too. Yeah. It's not about, I want them to imprint on me so I can train them all and be the Raptor King. Like, he genuinely just wants to be there to support these babies that he's funding.
I don't know if I agree. I think he does want to be there for that, but it's also, he makes this about him. There is a lot of making things about him. He is the guy that does the introduction. It is this is what I'm giving to you. He is not it's not just altruistic. It is. He does want all that.
I don't think he really understands the difference between the two.
Well, that's the point.
That's a more, It's a creepy moment. I'm sorry. If you guys like that moment, great.
No, I think it's a creepy moment.
It's a horror moment. It's like Alien again.
Oh, the animal?
Like from the original film.
I always find it caught, right in the middle, like where it's the sweetest thing ever. And I think it's caught in between the two on everybody's face too, where it's like, oh, look at this cute thing. Like, what is this? It's a velociraptor. You bred raptors, and you hear the terror in his voice,
and terror and wonder because he's been studying velociraptors, and he's seeing one for real.
Yeah,
and it's the same reaction they had when he said he had a T-Rex. Like, you built a T-Rex. There's like, you created a T-Rex, and then you have that moment, and then you're like, are they freaked out? And then they're like, oh wow, this is so that mix of wonder and terror at the same time.
Well, that is this movie.
Yeah,
that mix of wonder and terror. You said it exactly right.
It's the experience as a viewer too.
Yeah. And of course, Goldblum was going, well, okay, what about the ones that breed in the wild?
Actually, they can't breed in the wild. Population control is one of our security precautions. There's no unauthorized breeding in Jurassic Park.
Because they're all females.
Yeah.
You're going to go lift up all the dinosaur skirts?
Because no, they're engineered that way. And then we get this speech from Goldblum, which I know I'm going to cut to.
John, the kind of control you're attempting is, it's not possible. Listen, if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is.
It's a great speech and a really important one because essentially this movie is, goes to the archetype of the very first science fiction story ever. This is Frankenstein. Yeah. This is the scientist who has created something that he cannot control.
Does he say it later on, or is it now when he says, well, there was a reason these things became extinct?
There's a couple
natural
of
selection.
speeches.
Yeah, there are a couple of really good ones.
Yeah.
And of course, the scientists are like, come on, you're suggesting a group of females will find a way to breed? And his response is,
no, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
One of the most iconic quotes of this entire movie.
By the way, that is absolutely true.
Yep.
Yeah. The idea and you know, obviously, I don't think Jurassic Park is a political movie, but there are areas going on in our world where scientists are making decisions right now, particularly in terms of genetics, that we don't really understand the consequences of.
Or robotics.
Yes, I know that one too.
Yes, Steve.
Okay.
AI is coming.
Here.
Did you see the dancing of dog or whatever it was?
I sense like a long-term issue over AI right now.
Like on top 10 and Cine-Files, AI just
It's coming for you, okay?
Yeah, it is. We're going to be, you know, all this stuff we're talking about.
You better watch it. That phone that you just cracked the screen, it's going to attack you in the middle of the night.
It will. I will be its servant. It will be my overlord.
And of course, the end of the scene is just as you were talking about, the realization that they have velociraptors. And what do we cut to? The velociraptor paddock. And again, we are withholding the velociraptors. We're not going to see them. We're seeing our characters look down. We see this bull lifted up, suspended over them, slowly lowered down, and then we hear them and we see the branches moving and their reactions.
Great example of how important reaction shots are in this movie, because that's all you see. And then it's the genius move of showing those reaction shots through the rustling trees. So on top of seeing their terrified, disgusted faces, you also feel like you're semi in the cage with that poor steer that was just
absolutely
demolished.
Well, this is the lesson again from Jaws, is that the terror that happens in our imagination is far more powerful than if you see it.
Yeah.
You know, if we imagine it, that's where it really gets into us. And by the way, what they are actually acting to is Spielberg making noises of screams and yells.
Yeah.
That's what's actually going on. Apparently, he does a lot of that. He does a lot of directing through talking while people are doing actions on set. Wow. Yeah, all the time. You wouldn't like that.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't.
I bet if Spielberg cast you, you'd like it.
Let's have a conversation.
You would make sure you like it.
Yeah. Let me see. Stephen.
Steve. Oh,
Please.
can I call you Steve?
Can I call you?
And then we hear Muldoon's voice. This is the first time we've seen him since the beginning. And he says they should all be destroyed.
Yeah.
Not a good thing when your game warden says that.
Yeah, why is he still the game warden if he thinks they should be destroyed?
Well, I mean, you got a gig. I mean, have you ever been
No,
on a
but
gig?
why is he still have him hired is what I'm saying. Why is John Hammond still hiring this guy if he thinks they should all be destroyed?
No, he handpicked him.
Yeah.
I think like a lot. I mean, I think there are a lot of situations where people hire a great person because they're great and then do not listen to that person's advice.
Yes, true.
That happens.
Well, or
in all
it's
sorts
the
of
other way
situations.
around where you could say, why didn't he fire Dennis Nedry? He can't.
Oh, yeah.
He's
well, that's
basically
another good point.
he's the best of the best again, and he's the
Yeah.
only one who could run the entire thing.
Spare no expense.
And now we hear a little bit more about what these raptors are. Right, they're lethal at 8 months. Their speed is cheetah speed or more. Astonishing jumper, intelligence, problem solving, especially the big one. We hear about this big one.
We bred 8 originally, but when she came in, she took over the pride and killed all but 2 of the others. That one, when she looks at you, you can see she's working things out.
Yes.
And then describes even they've been testing out the fences. I mean, this is really scary. And you kind of go again, why is Hammond not destroying them?
Right.
And the answer is because he has this belief. And that belief is really, really dangerous.
Actually interesting now that I'm thinking about it, applying that belief to the events of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Like,
I haven't seen it. So.
yeah, I don't think I ever really connected the dots there quite as much, but yeah.
Is that what's going on in that movie? Or
A little bit. The island, because of the volcano, is at risk. So it's about, do we save the dinosaurs and get them off, or do we let them perish?
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And of course, as they're all a little bit, and we see, by the way, the rig that was used to lower the bull come out, and we could see kind of the disgusted, somewhat nauseous faces after watching this, carnage. And Hammond says,
Yes. Well, who's hungry?
and we go off to a very elegant meal. Again, we've spared no expense. And we're talking about merchandise, and we're talking about profits, and Hammond's going, no, but we don't want to cater to the super rich. And he's like, oh, we'll have coupon day.
What a magnanimous person John is.
Absolutely. Well, he thinks he is.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And Malcolm kind of watching all this.
I love this. This is me in the room. What Malcolm does, I'm not saying I'm as smooth or charming as Jeff, but that's
You're very smooth.
That's my thought. If that's my thought process, everything he says, I'm that person in the room. Well, now wait a minute. What about this, this, and this? And I think it's fantastic what he says throughout this whole scene.
Gee, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here. staggers me.
Yes! Nature is destructive.
And at this point, the lawyer signed on because he's like, we're going to make so much money. And so he's like, oh, no, things are really different than we expected. And Malcolm's response is, yeah, they're a lot worse.
Don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
Yeah, man.
And
great lines.
Yeah, and this speech I love because I think this is really, really smart, which is...
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it.
Banging on the table as he does this. I think this is such a great point because you can build on the science of the past. So Archimedes struggles with buoyancy and he figures it out, and we don't have to do that struggle anymore because that's already done. Right. Einstein struggles with general relativity and theories on gravity, and we don't have to do that anymore. We start from where they stopped. And so our science is extremely advanced, but everybody has to learn wisdom on their own. Mm-hmm. And so our wisdom goes way more slowly. We all start as idiots and learn it slowly. So you can be armed with all this tremendous science and not have the wisdom of how to wield it. Mm-hmm. I think that is a fantastic, great speech.
What enhances it even more is when he's giving that speech, you're basically in like this oval of marketing too. It's like he's saying all these things that you shouldn't be doing, and all those things, like to the extent that you have Jurassic tennis being promoted over there, everything is, you are consumed by it.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
And Hammond's argument is, well, what if we wanted to save the condors and bring them back? And Malcolm's like, no, the dinosaurs were already selected out.
Yep.
And then he has this thing. He's like, how, they ask, how is a scientist so anti-science? And this is, again, pure Goldblum.
Oh, what's so great about discovery? It's a violent, penetrative act that scars what it explores, what you call discovery. I call the rape of the natural world.
Mm-hmm. Rape of the natural world.
That might be a little farther than I would go.
Yeah, well.
But Ellie's with him, because she says, how can we know anything about an extinct ecosystem? How can you be so confident you can control it? Because she's already seen they picked poisonous plants because they thought they looked good.
But these are aggressive living things that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll defend themselves violently if necessary.
This is not going the way John Hammond expected it to. And he turns to Grant, expecting that Grant, the biggest lover of dinosaurs here, is going to be on his side, and Grant's not either.
Dinosaurs and man, two species separated by 65 million years of evolution, have just been suddenly thrown back into the mix together. How can we possibly have the slightest idea of what to expect?
Thank God for the blood-sucking lawyer.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think about this too. This is, again, I don't want to be political about this, but there has been an incredibly rapid change in technology in terms of cell phones and social media that have completely shifted the way we deal with politics and interaction and how humans relate to each other and how children are raised and levels of empathy. And this technology has happened in the last decade, and we do not know how to deal with it. And it is changing us in ways we don't understand, and a lot of them very destructive. And I think that is exactly what we're talking about, is science moving forward because they can, and not asking about whether or not they should.
And we're all running to catch up every single step of the way. You get the new thing, and you got to learn in a split second what that new iOS update is going to bring into your life, whether you like it or not.
Yep. And then we find out they're here. Time to introduce us to Timmy and Lexi, our grandkids.
Yeah.
It's I think there are a couple of brilliant changes from the book that happen here. One is that they make Lexi the computer character, which is really, really smart. And I think they switched the ages from the book, I think. And the other one's coming up because we're about to start our Jeep tour. And we see that these Jeeps run on tracks. And again, he says we've spared no expense. And Tim is obsessed with Dr. Grant.
Yeah.
Because he loves dinosaurs. Is Dr. Grant into Tim?
No.
Not so much.
He keeps changing cars that he's going to ride in.
That is a brilliantly blocked scene,
Right?
too. And the way they capture it all as you're kind of like weaving in and out of the cars. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
And this is classic, perfect Spielberg, because my memory is that in the book, Dr. Grant likes kids. And in the movie, he doesn't like kids. Right. That is so clear. It makes such clear storytelling of what is the journey of this character from beginning to end. And a character who doesn't like kids has conflict and contrast as opposed to one who does.
It's so key to his journey in the film, too.
Exactly.
It basically enhances his whole arc in the movie, too.
Yeah. And of course, just as they're getting in, then the girl comes back, Lexi, and she says,
she said I should ride with you because it'd be good for you.
so now he's got both kids. Up in the computer room, we get to meet Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, man.
My favorite.
He's great in this movie. I mean, he was so, this era of him sort of arriving between Jungle Fever and all these little parts he's showing up with. He's always so great, and he's great in this one.
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas.
Yeah, small part in that too around this time.
And it's another 2 years before Pulp Fiction. It's coming soon.
Yeah.
He's chain smoking and he's working, and Hammond is watching them on the monitors. And again, this is great Spielberg storytelling as the tour starts, and everyone's excited. Grant's response is, "God help me, we're in the hands of engineers." And we hear a voice talking to them, and the gates open as we hear, "Welcome to Jurassic Park."
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
What do they got in there? King Kong?
That's, by the way, Richard Kiley's voice.
Spare no expense.
Spare no expense. What a shout out they gave him. It's such a weird thing in the movie. We got Richard Kiley. And it was like, how many people in the audience were like, oh, they got Richard Kiley?
Definitely not 6-year-old me.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You weren't a big Richard Kiley fan?
That's the thing that's so
Are you now?
Well, I'm aware now because of the movie. I'm aware of who he is because of the movie. I also tried sea bass because of this movie. I never liked it, but I tried it because of this movie.
It's not my favorite fish.
Yeah, it's not mine either.
There are a lot of fish I like more than sea bass.
Yeah.
But we digress. On the tour, we're going to go see these dinosaurs that are called Dilophosaurus, and we see a sign about them, and everyone's really excited to see them. They're not there.
Nope.
Back in the lab, Sam Jackson is knocking down some glitches, and now we finally see Dennis at his work, and as you say, his nasty workstation, and he's, automating all this sorts of codes, and he is complaining and bitching, and it's very clear John Hammond does not like this guy.
Yeah.
Apparently there's some financial problems or something.
Always financial problems.
Yeah.
And Dennis's financial problems are always Hammond's financial problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think he's a nephew?
He's a what?
He's the nephew of Hammond.
Oh, a nephew. No, I
don't think so.
Why would he keep bailing him out?
Because he seems like the one guy who can handle all this code.
Well, I mean, Nedry does have the capabilities and the talent and the skill to be able to manipulate Hammond for more money. I mean, he says he's like the one-man band of this whole operation.
Yeah.
And it's proven, too. If you take him out of the equation, they can't fix it themselves. So basically, Nedry can consistently ask Hammond for more money.
Well, and this is also a sign that actually Hammond is not building a park that makes sense. I mean, even if you take away the things that go wrong in this particular thing, it's like everything can't be dependent upon one guy that nobody else understands what they did in a huge amusement park.
Right.
That is not how this can work. And in the lab, we hear, they're approaching the Tyrannosaurus paddock. And we end up at the T-Rex paddock, and the Jeep slows down in front of a fence, and everyone is really excited, and they're looking out the window. And again, we see that 10,000 volts sign on the big fence, and there's flashing lights. And then Malcolm says,
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs.
to which Ellie's response is,
Dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth.
Right on point.
A great look from Alan and Ian. And then a goat rises up from the ground. It's bleeding. And now we kind of realize, the T-Rex is going to come and eat the goat. And everyone's getting excited. And
Poor Lex, she's a vegetarian. You can't eat the goat.
no, she's upset about it. And Alan's kind of going, look, the T-Rex is going to want to hunt. It doesn't want to just have this served to him.
Right.
And then nothing happens. The goat lays down. Everyone is really sad. And we don't get to see the T-Rex. Again, we withhold the animals.
2 no-shows.
Yeah. And I love Hammond watching on the monitors, and Malcolm like gets right up in that camera. It's like, are there supposed to be dinosaurs in your park?
Such a great move.
I really hate that man. That's such a great line. It's all these like teeny tiny things that you don't think really click in your head. And it's just when you watch this movie over and over, you start to memorize the inflection.
Yeah.
Like I've hit the point with Jurassic Park where whether it's the way a line of dialogue is delivered or even the way one of the dinosaurs roars or makes any noise for that matter, I know those sound effects so well that when I hear them in other movies or TV shows, it completely takes me out of it.
Right.
And they do that. They do that often, actually.
Yeah, they definitely will use them in other places. And one of the things that I think one of the misconceptions about great movies is people think that, oh, great movies are because someone had a great idea. And that's not what it is. Great movies are thousands and thousands of little great ideas. Yeah. And this movie is a perfect example of it. There's so many little tiny moments that are great that build up to make this whole movie great. We're back on the tour, and now Malcolm starts talking about chaos and chaos theory. And first he's describing the butterfly effect, and he's talking to Sadler about it. And there's this really weird moment as he's talking to her that he's kind of touching her hair.
Yeah.
It is so odd.
It's invasive.
Yes. Now, I can't remember. Is Alan in this same Jeep with them?
He's with them.
That's what I thought. So this dude is all over your girlfriend. And explaining chaos theory by dripping water on her hand, which he is holding, and speaking very softly and closely to her. Yeah. What's he doing?
He was looking out the window to catch the Triceratops because I think he even goes, Alan, do you hear this? Are you looking at this?
Right.
And he wasn't quite paying attention.
Right.
Well, we know where his priorities are. And of course, he sees the Triceratops, and what does he do? Gets out of the car.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't be able to get out of a car on a ride, particularly a ride around dinosaurs.
I think Muldoon says it. He said, I said we should have had locking mechanisms on the vehicle doors.
Yeah. And while this is happening, Dennis has some cameras on some kind of a frozen locker or something and on a boat.
Yeah.
And we know we're getting close to that time. And they walk up to a Triceratops. So this one is a full puppet. It's 8 guys that control it. They're breathing. They're controlling the eye movement, controlling the tongue. This scene's really, really well done.
When he lays on that Triceratops, that is another chill-inducing moment. Every single time I see it, it's like I could feel the Triceratops skin under his hands for the first time.
Well, and it's so funny because I'm sure when you were on the set and the puppeteer stopped moving that thing, it's just a completely dead object. And yet the performances make it a totally living thing. And that Triceratops is sick. And the sound design, by the way, is really good for this too. And they're trying to figure out what it is. Is it a local plant? Is it, and we see again now the scientists of Ellie Sadler and what she's involved with because she really wants to figure this out. And the big thing, she's like, you know what I would need to see is some droppings.
Dino droppings?
Back in the control room, I don't think I mentioned there's a big, huge storm coming.
Yeah, I was going to mention that if they had that scene earlier.
Yeah, and the storm is still coming, and it's not weakening. It hasn't changed course.
Does it happen in the book? Is there a storm in the book?
Okay. And this scene is intercut with the Triceratops scene.
Oh, it's in the book?
Yeah. No, in the movie.
Yeah,
They cut back and forth between the two.
Right. And now they're making the decision, we have to end the tour. Because the risk is too big with this storm coming in. And you see John Hammond is not happy about this. He wants to let the tour keep going. And the other thing they're saying is that we're going to have a shuttle and all the staff is going to be leaving off on some boat. And then we cut to what I can only describe as a very big pile of shit.
That is one big pile of shit.
And Ellie's got she's literally upper arm deep in this big, those are some long gloves she's got.
That also has one of my favorite lines of the entire movie. So my entire family loves Jurassic Park. We watch it over and over and over again, and we repeat many lines. But I think the line that we repeat more than any other is when Malcolm goes to her, you better wash your hands before you eat anything. Every single time one of us is ready to eat something and does something, we always say that.
There's another great moment, too, where Malcolm says to Grant, she's tenacious, and his response is, "You have no idea." Here's something I think about about Alan and Ellie's relationship is I think he's really confident in their relationship.
Oh yes, of course he is.
I mean, I think he is distracted sometimes, and I think he isn't always paying, but he knows her in a deep way.
I also think like Perry said, where his priorities are is his archaeology. That's where his real, like 100% love and attention is what he does for a career and for his job. So Ellie doing her own thing, he's fine with because he's not super obsessed with, being possessive about her. He's got other things that he focuses on, and he knows she can handle herself, and she does throughout this whole movie. Laura Dern, it's incredible. Like, this is 1993, right? In 2018, we're still not going like, okay, these women lead these films, blah blah blah. Throughout the whole film, she is a super feminist, and we'll find that later on when she has that like quick back and forth with him, and she's saying like, we'll discuss the gender politics or whatever. And I love that every moment, and it's not overt, it's not pushed. It's Steven Spielberg. He loves and respects female characters in a lot of his movies, and in a lot of these things with Laura Dern throughout the movie, you see that.
Well, part of it is just the casting of Laura Dern.
Yeah.
Because she's got so much strength to her.
Yep.
Dennis is loading up some kind of application. The word execute comes in. The storm is coming in. Then, sure, the lawyer guy, Gennaro, is starting to get a little bit nervous. And we're calling back the tour. And Sadler says, no, I want to stay with the Triceratops and stay with the doctor. He's got his own Jeep, so that's not going to be a problem. They all agree. We can start to get some lightning flashes. We see some big waves coming in. I think, but I'm not sure, that was actually shot in Hurricane Iniki.
I also believe that the doctor she stays with is one of the producers on the film.
He is one of the producers. Yeah, his name is Jerry someone, but I missed his name.
Gerard Mullen?
Yeah, something like that. Now it's about time. Dennis has got to go. So he calls down to the boat, and they say, we're leaving right now, and he begs them for 15 minutes, and he says he knows he could do it in 20, maybe he could do it in 18, and the tour is coming back, and Hammond is upset, and they're kind of going, look, this could have been a lot worse. This could have been really bad. And Dennis comes up and is like,
anybody want a soda or something? Because I'm going up to the machine. I thought maybe, I'd get somebody something, because I've had all these sweets, and I think I'm going to get something salty. I thought maybe some...
And he is nervous and awkward and says, I've got to do something with the system. It's going to reboot. There's some minor systems going in and out. No big deal. And he hits execute and he heads off, sets a timer, and he's gone. And we're back in the Jeeps, and it's raining. And Grant asks about Malcolm if he has kids. And he says 3.
What? That was I remember, like, it's so random. I don't remember that he has kids.
Yeah.
And isn't there in Jurassic?
He's got a kid in Jurassic.
In Lost World, right?
World.
Yeah. She's a gymnast, right, or something like that.
She is a gymnast.
Yeah,
that leads to probably
that is
one of the most divisive scenes in the entire movie.
Oh yeah.
I still remember seeing it and going, oh well, that's a plant. Right at the beginning of the movie.
But when they actually discuss that at the beginning of the movie, her name is escaping me right now. But that conversation between the two of them does feel like a really natural, organic father-daughter conversation.
No, it's again, I saw the movie 20 years ago and haven't seen it since. But I just remember we see her doing a bunch of gymnastics. That's going to come in handy at some point.
It's the heavy-handed, ridiculous way it does come in handy later on in the movie.
I do love Malcolm's line where Alan asks, "Are you married?" And he says,
"Occasionally. I'm always on the lookout for a future ex-Mrs. Malcolm."
Yeah.
That's great. Dennis is at an airlock. He opens... waits on a timer, doors open. Sam Jackson is smoking his cigarettes and looking at all the security systems shutting down.
Hold on to your butts.
And at first it's sort of, oh, well, Dennis said something like this was going to happen. But it seems to me when you have giant predators that, you kind of should be really careful about.
It's just the door security systems at first. It doesn't become problematic until the fences start going out.
Yeah.
Then that's when all their red flags go up.
And Dennis gets his shaving cream can. He starts loading it up with T-Rex DNA and Velociraptor and Stegosauruses and all of them, closes them back up. And then we get to this moment you mentioned before, which is Ian Malcolm asks, "Is Ellie available?" And Alan's response is interesting. Why? Why are you asking this question? As if he hasn't noticed him flirting with her shamelessly since we first met. And then the Jeeps stopped.
Hey, what'd that touch?
We didn't touch anything. We stopped.
And they look up at the fences, and the fences are going unarmed. They're failing all over the park. We are finally getting, this has been a long time, we are finally getting to the action part of this movie.
Yeah.
Dennis is in a Jeep. driving towards a gate. It switches the manual override, and now why we see why the power had to be off, because he's got to go through an electrified gate. And back in our control lab, Sam Jackson, who's I think Mr. Arnold, is starting to go, wait, why are these things going off? Things are starting to not look so good. And Arnold's trying to, access the main program and get things turned back on. And he gets this permission denied and then say the magic word. And then that animated Dennis Nedry laughing at him.
You didn't say the magic word.
Please! God damn it, I hate this hacker crap. And the phones are out. And now we start to wonder, where did the vehicles stop?
Yeah.
And we cut to the goat. There's a certain kind of cut that Spielberg does. He does it throughout this film, which is that we pose a question on the A side of the cut, and we answer the question with the B side. Where are the Jeeps stopped? Cut to the goat. And it's such a beautiful, perfect bit of storytelling, which is like, oh. And of course, it comes with a big, oh, shit. And Alan has gone to check on the other Jeep, and he comes back to Malcolm, who asks, are the kids okay? And he goes, well, I didn't ask. Why wouldn't they be okay? He's so clueless.
Yeah.
It's like kids get scared. But Tim's having a great time. He's found the night vision goggles. The lawyer's a little like, put those down. Those look expensive. And he's looking around. And then we hear the first thump. Sound designer is Gary Rydstrom, who we just talked about with Terminator 2. He's one of the great sound designers of all time. Those thumps are redwood trees falling.
Oh.
They are big.
Interesting.
There's a couple of interesting sound choices that come up.
There's some great ones. And then we hear another thump.
You feel that?
And Tim hears it, and the sister hears it. And then we hear a thump, and we see a ripple and a glass of water.
Yeah.
Talk about great details in a film.
Iconic. Yep.
So apparently Spielberg got this idea when he was listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire while driving in his car and saw his reflection move in the rearview mirror. And that gave him both the idea for the rearview mirror shot, which is going to happen later, and this vibration in the glass of water. And he said, this is what I want. And it goes to the effects team. They could not figure out how to make it happen. It is apparently really, really hard. They tried everything. They banged hammers, rang bells, knocked wood together, and nothing. Because it wasn't just they could make the water vibrate, but making that perfect concentric circles was really, really hard. Spielberg calls them like the night before the shoot. It's like, you got that water thing figured out, and they go, "Oh yeah, yeah, it'll be great." They don't have it. And finally, they found one particular note played on a guitar, and that is what did this.
Son of a
So
gun.
random, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that detail.
I can only imagine like running through the prop warehouse, going like, "What are we gonna try? What do we try?
Yeah.
Let me try G." Cling.
That's what it was. I mean, that's sometimes what the job.
Yeah.
Filmmaking is a weird job sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
How do I make a glass of water vibrate with perfect ripple circles?
Doesn't seem like it'd be that difficult, and yet it is.
We'll test it out. Let's see how quickly you figure it out.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. I'm more worried about the Jello moving. Yeah. Go ahead.
The lawyer's starting to notice those big thumpy sounds. He looks up in the mirror, and then we see that same shake that Spielberg saw with Earth, Wind, and Fire. I wonder, has got to get you into my life? Yeah.
What song it was?
Yeah. And his lawyer's kind of going, well, maybe it's the power trying to come back on.
Sure.
And Tim looks over at the night with his night vision goggles. The goat is gone. Yeah. And then we're in a low angle shot. We see the kids in the foreground. We see the glass sunroof in the background. And then Lexi says,
Where's the goat?
and man, that goat hitting that piece of meat and blood hitting that glass.
Even before, and then I think after, actually, you get to see the little T-Rex fingers like picking at the fence.
That's right after.
Yeah.
You can see that after.
I love that's
Yeah.
like one of my most random favorite shots in the movie.
And then we see finally our first real view of the T-Rex as it swallows the goat. Yeah. That is
A good shot.
an hour and 3 minutes into the film. I mean, that's that's why like that's an hour of just a movie about opening this park and all the relationships and the science. And it takes us, can you imagine a movie today spending an hour before it got to its first action sequence?
I wish more movies would keep that in mind, because another part of the reason why the spectacle is so incredible is because they had the foundation to wow you when it actually happened. It just seems like so many movies nowadays are just throwing everything they can at you right from the start, and it just winds up being meaningless.
One of the best lessons I ever learned in film school was in a sound design class. And what the teacher said was, in order to have loudness, we must have silence.
Yeah.
And that applies in so many things, that spectacle only happens with contrast. Is that if you just have spectacle, everything becomes nothing, even if it's the most impressive stuff in the world.
Yeah.
But if you withhold the T-Rex, that T-Rex is going to have impact when we see it. And this definitely does.
I feel like that was Perry's shot at the Transformers movies. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go.
You're the one who said it. It actually didn't even cross my mind. But yeah, that's a great example.
But I will say, it doesn't always work the other way either, because Batman vs. Superman, there's like 45 minutes before there's an action sequence sometimes. And so it all depends on the
Well, the other stuff has to be good.
Well, there it is. There it is. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it depends on the filmmaker and the movie. Yeah, but it's worked so effectively here. It's so positively effectively here.
This sequence is my favorite sequence
It is so
in the entire
believable.
movie.
It is so
amazing.
This was the point in the movie where, like, I was super into it before we even got here, but this is where that switch kind of flipped, and all of a sudden my brain started processing how much I admire and value and how happy I am to have movie magic quite like this.
It's so perfectly constructed. And the mix of the way the effects work, the practical effects, the CG effects, and the reactions of all the people, the shot selection, the camera work, it's all just done so
Almost perfectly constructed. There is one minor flaw in this whole sequence.
Okay.
So I'm getting to the end of it a little, but you know how the car and eventually the people go over the edge?
Yes. Yeah.
The T-Rex should be, kind of at eye level, but the T-Rex is on level ground with the cars.
Right.
Which is, it makes no sense, but you don't
now I
really
have to look at it again.
You don't really think about it unless I guess you're sitting there and analyzing it, because it wasn't on, I don't even know how many watches until I'm like, wait, like how is the T-Rex right there, but then the car falls over the edge?
That's a great point. The lawyer sees the T-Rex and he bolts. He definitely chooses the better part of valor.
Yeah.
And Lexi's response is,
He left us.
Oh.
He left us.
I have a feeling that Lexi will have abandonment issues for the rest of her life.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, poor Lex.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. He runs into a toilet stall.
And then we get another really great line. When you gotta go, you gotta go.
When you gotta go,
because
you
that's
gotta
another
go.
one I say
Well,
all
because
the time.
they haven't quite seen the T-Rex yet. They don't really know what's happening. And then it comes through the fence and we get that roar.
Boy, do I hate being right all the time.
One other thing that's interesting about the scene is that it wasn't supposed to be raining. Spielberg added that at the last minute. Problem is, Stan Winston had not designed these puppets for the rain.
Oh, shit.
And the skin was absorbent. So it got heavier and heavier.
Oh, Jesus.
It was like, it was like kind of sponge material for the skin. And they're really precisely calibrated motors for weight. And so suddenly the T-Rex is hundreds of pounds heavier than they thought. And it kept breaking down. So they had to keep drying it off and shoot
Jesus.
until it got too heavy and wouldn't run anymore. And then dry it off. Yeah. It makes things a lot harder. And at first, Alan says,
Keep absolutely still. This vision's based on movement.
and what's the next thing we see? That flashlight.
Why is Timmy grabbing the flashlight?
It's Lexi's got a flashlight.
I mean,
Oh,
what?
right.
You're a kid in the dark with a monster. What would you do if
I guess
you had
it's
a
a good point.
flashlight? You
Right.
would turn it. Plus, she doesn't know.
Yeah.
It's Tim that knows the dinos, not her.
Right.
Well, and the T-Rex bumps the Jeep, and man, that is a really powerful flashlight.
Yeah.
That thing's kind of amazing. And they are trying to get the flashlight off,
Turn the light off.
and then Tim pulls that door closed. And now the T-Rex is sure something's going on in this Jeep. And I love that, again, it's all these little details. T-Rex's head pops up in the glass, the flashlight hits its eye, and the pupil dilates. That is so cool. Such a brilliant little detail. this has tested surround sound systems for a long. You go to that stereo dealership and they play this roar. The sound design's amazing.
Yeah.
It is apparently a combined roar of a crocodile, a lion, and a baby elephant. Crocodile for the low end, the lion for the attack of the sound, and the baby elephant is the high end.
Yeah.
Again, this is Gary Rydstrom's a genius. And how much time he spent to figure out this combination of making this sound just like this is remarkable. And they start screaming, and the T-Rex comes down through that sunroof. I don't know how they're alive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of power coming at that they're holding off. The shots, of course, are great with that POV up towards the T-Rex and the T-Rex's POV coming down towards them. And at this moment, Grant and Malcolm, they're just watching, steaming up that
what would
window.
you do?
Well, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, you're going to mount the T-Rex, try to stop it? Like, there's nothing you can do. But
That's usually my move.
And it's so apparent on Grant's face too, because like we keep talking about how he's just laser focused on whatever he's looking at in relation to the dinosaurs. And at this moment, it's like his face reeks of pure terror. Like, what is happening right now?
But he grabs a flare. Yeah. The T-Rex is pushing that Jeep around, which again is this mix of puppet effects, practical effects with the Jeep, the movement of the mud. This one, by the way, turning the Jeep doesn't quite work perfectly for me, but it's still really cool.
That scene that shot where you see the two of them sinking into the mud too.
Yeah.
That's another really great effect where you feel like you could feel the mud. You could feel that being soaked into their clothes, and your heart breaks for them.
And Grant lights that flare, calls to the T-Rex. Hey! The T-Rex turns, looks right at him, and he throws that flare, and the T-Rex starts running in the forest, and we go like, cool,
You done it, Grant. No. Mr. fucking Chaos Theory has to pull out his flare, because God forbid he not be the hero of the situation.
So this was added later. So this is Jeff Goldblum's idea.
Of course it was.
And well, because when the Chaos Theory scientist became kind of more of a rock star, he had to become more heroic. And so, it's still kind of stupid.
Massively so.
And he draws the T-Rex away. The T-Rex charges him. Malcolm says, get the kids. He throws the flare, runs towards the bathroom, which totally collapses, injures him, exposing our friend on the toilet. Yeah. And that is it for him. Yeah. Goodbye. Bye-bye, guy. Yeah.
Poor Gennaro.
He didn't move.
If you're gonna go, that's how you go in a movie, though.
Yeah.
I can see it. That's Elvis style. Go
well,
on the toilet.
What would you do? You're like caught. You're caught on a toilet, and all he's witnessing the T-Rex looking at him, and he's like busy like wiping the water off his face.
I love the fact they put the toilet by the T-Rex place, because people are gonna lose their shit. That's
a great.
It just makes the most sense.
That is a great point. Yeah, I don't think there's a good set of survival skills for T-Rex. Although Grant he gets to Lexi, pulls her out of the car, says, "Don't move.
Don't move. Can't see us if we don't move."
They freeze.
Yeah.
The T-Rex gets close, breathes, blows Grant's hat off, and then pushes the Jeep, which they hide behind as it spins.
This is great. All this buildup of drama and tension in this movie, it's just so brilliant.
Every little detail is such a great...
And it's believable.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're now right at the edge of this wall. And, what are our choices here exactly? And finally, he grabs a cable and starts heading down the wall, and she climbs on his back and is pretty much choking him. And they see another line, and what do they look up? And there's that Jeep. It's about to come down at them. Yep. And we got to get that other line because we got to get out of the way. And we start swinging. And again, this is the perfect Spielbergness of this moment, is just as they grab that line, that Jeep goes by right past them. It is a great looking stunt and effect. We're back in our control room. Samuel Jackson is getting into what Dennis did and finally goes, we're going to have to go through every single line of code.
How many lines of code are there?
About 2 million.
2 million.
Yeah.
And then John Hammond turns to Robert Muldoon and says,
Robert, I wonder if perhaps you would be good enough to take a guest Jeep and bring back my grandchildren.
Now he cares.
I mean, he always cared about them, but it's the lack of culpability.
Well, there's a lack of that throughout the whole franchise. I'll be honest.
Oh, boy.
Here we go. Jurassic World. We're going through divorce. We're going to fawn off our kids on on Bryce Dallas Howard.
Right.
And then Bryce Dallas Howard is going to fawn them off on her assistant.
Well, it's actually that mirrors what happens in this movie because at the beginning at the mines, you hear someone say, Heaven's not there because his daughter's going through a divorce. Assuming that is his only daughter and it's Lex and Tim's parents, there's a whole lot of mirroring happening here to the point that you also have a very similar scene in Jurassic World with the window being pushed down, but it's the gyrosphere instead.
Right.
Well, this is like if you feel that in order to have your franchise, you must reproduce exactly stuff that happened in previous films, you are having a problem and you're not being creative enough.
There's good examples and bad examples of that.
I agree.
I applaud the way it's done in Force Awakens. I thought that was very effective and a great way to honor the original, but also usher in new fans.
Agreed. Yes, I agree with that. It's a good point. But if it's just replicating things, people like it when we do this, let's do that again. Right. It's no good. And so Muldoon says sure, and Sadler decides that she's going with him, and we have some adventurous music. And then the last thing we hear is Arnold says,
John, I can't get Jurassic Park back online without Dennis Nedry.
So we already talked about some of the similarities between Jurassic Park and Jaws. The scary opening, not letting us see the T-Rex and Velociraptors, but this is the biggest one. Both films have a major shift in tone about halfway through. In Jaws, the first half is about Brody trying to close the beaches, while the first half of Jurassic Park is about Hammond fighting to open his park. For Jaws, everything changes at 1 hour and 10 minutes into the film, when Brody, Hooper, and Quint board the orca to hunt the shark. In Jurassic Park, everything changes when Hammond asks Muldoon to bring back his grandchildren. How far are we into the movie at that point? Exactly 1 hour and 10 minutes. Crazy, right? From this point forward, this movie is no longer an intellectual conversation about evolution, consumerism, and safety. It's a fight for survival. And we are going to jump right into that fight when the Cine-Files returns next week for part 2 of Jurassic Park.